And here's two guys that survived camping out in front of the Apple Store, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 26 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
In today's episode, we're joined by Ron Davis of EMS Newbie Podcast, and the three of us survive using only our iPads. You are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Well, the contest went pretty well. We got lots of emails, lots of emails. We were very happily surprised. And don't forget, just because we don't have a contest this week does not mean you cannot share the show. Share it through Facebook, share it through Twitter. Best way for you to survive is to have an informed community. So today's episode is going to be about the purpose of electronics in prep. And Ron Davis is joining us today as, we just roped him in and kind of shanghaied him into the show today.
It has nothing to do with medicine.
Not a thing.
So he stopped by the studio and we said, just stay, come on, join us for a show. So here we are. And the reason we're going to bring this up today is so many people in the survival community downplay the importance or significance or purpose of electronics in prep. I think a lot of people are looking at it from the point of Titawakia, the end of the world as we know it, which, as we've said in previous episodes, is really not probably the best way to focus on your preps and or even just survival in general. But I think let's start off, we can talk about, we use electronics every day. They've become part of our life. We use our cell phones, and Ron, in your normal day life are actually one of the wizards behind the screen and develop Apple products for
computer software.
For computer software for the Mac, and Jonathan is in the has been in the IT industry for a long time, but yours is more of the strategy and corporate development side of things.
Yeah, but I don't know how my job would work without a computer and email.
Yeah,
I mean, that's these days kind of need it just to feel normal.
Yeah, and I think that is since that's really the overarching part of my job and what I do in my daily life is technology. But when we get into prep, I think where does it play into things? And I think one of the easiest places to start with, and there was a discussion about this on the forum, which is ebook readers and using ebook readers in that. And I think that's, for me, I think right now I have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 30 books on my iPad. And
I have 120.
Do you really?
Yeah, I have 120
you read
books.
Just insanely fast. So.
Yeah, I mean, I read quickly, but I have 120 books, and there's a bunch of those that are, survival guides, books, general good reading to have around.
Yeah.
Even classics.
I'm the same. I have a bunch of books. And you said iPad, right?
iPad/Kindle, yes.
Yeah,
so.
see, I would think, and I guess you said something just a second ago that made me think about use the electronics in prep. And I think, that made me think, well, there's a lot of uses you could make of electronics before something happened. And
right.
I think people are always thinking, how could I use it after something happened?
Mm-hmm.
And that might be an interesting dichotomy. But I was thinking after something happened, and I have a Kindle. Actually, I don't. I sent it to my father last week, and I have an iPad. And if I was thinking after a situation, I'd rather have the Kindle than the iPad.
I can see where you're coming from that.
Because it lasts so much longer.
It does last longer, but the iPad gives you apps.
It does.
And there are multiple survival apps. And I'm thinking, again, in terms of survival as being likely scenarios, not the unlikely, end of the world scenario here.
Right.
So in likely scenarios, like, say, a hurricane, a Kindle's great because you do have reading potentially through an entire power outage, maybe even a week. But the iPad's nice because I can track news. I can go out to the internet and see what's going on, assuming I can get an internet connection. So you have a 3G iPad and the networks aren't completely down. But even beyond that, I've got other apps on here that can either entertain me or give me information. And then it goes to, how do I keep these things charged?
Yeah.
And, we've talked a lot about, and just, I'm not going to go into it. We'll do a little more detail later, but things like generators, batteries, solar power.
And that's the
all
big
important.
complaint that people have about electronics when they're thinking survival kind of situation is, oh, my book is never going to need a battery. I can read it forever. And you can't get your Kindle wet or else it's going to stop working.
Your book stops working when it gets wet, too.
Yeah, it does. And matter of fact, you could probably get your Kindle wetter than you can get your book and
That's
still
probably
have
true.
it useful.
But it's like any of your other gear. I mean, if you have any gear that you don't want to get wet, like I have knives that I don't necessarily want to get wet or get wet for a prolonged period of time, and I take measures to protect those, or like fire making. I mean, you don't want to get any of your, with the exception of like a Swedish steel or maybe a magnesium block, but your matches or everything else, we take measures to protect those from moisture. So
your clothing, you want to keep your clothing dry. Now, you can dry clothing, but the goal is to keep your clothing dry. You usually want to keep yourself pretty dry too. I mean, getting wet is usually not a good idea.
And electronics, even if you're going to get wet, you put them in a plastic bag and put them in a baggie and they'll stay dry.
And
you seal it.
There's a new chemical. It's not that new now, but it's a chemical bath that they can soak electronics in, and it coats it all. And I can't remember.
It's called Golden Seal, I believe.
Okay, we'll put it in the show notes.
Gold Seal, Anchor Seal. So
Please,
we'll
take my
it.
iPhone and dip it in some fluid.
They actually did that. Now, I don't know. The company was trying to license their technology. I don't know if they're even still around or what they're doing. But even beyond that, there are watertight bags. I can't remember the name of the brand, but we'll try to get that into the show notes too. But my Maxpedition backpack came with a couple of them as kind of a giveaway Maxpedition was doing. And they are watertight bags, and one of them actually is a bag specifically designed for the iPad. So it's just big enough to put an iPad in. And when you seal it, you can keep that thing underwater. They claim forever before it has any issues. So the idea is, you can keep your electronics dry. They even I know there's a company that makes a waterproof case for the iPad that you can use it in a bathtub. That's the way they show it. So, so you can read books in the bathtub is their whole idea. But I think the idea also goes back to, I look at it and say, I can store, I've got 120 books on my iPad right now in my Kindle app. You can't carry, I don't care how big and strong you are.
That was one of the
you can't carry
juxtapositions
120.
I wanted to do, is that you can carry, for all intents and purposes, the Library of Congress on a Kindle or on an iPad. And I know some incredibly bright people. I don't know any of them that could just retain all of that information.
Right.
And some of the information, maybe you could retain the generalities, but there's other stuff like, if it's a piece of knowledge you haven't accessed in a long time about a chemical compound, you may not remember the exact proportions and mixtures and everything else. Like, what was it? At some point I knew how to make biodiesel out of basic household chemicals, but I couldn't tell you how to do that today. I've completely forgotten. On the other hand, there's stupid stuff that I cannot seem to forget, like how many feet and inches are in a mile. But it's the weird things that your brain chooses to retain and not retain.
Here's another example. We've talked a couple times on the show about the fact that I've been dabbling a little bit in trying to understand better distilling, alcohol distilling. Well, I know the process now well enough that I think I could do it in a disaster using some equipment nearby potentially. But because it's something I might want to ingest, I'd like to have instructions nearby. And if I had an electronic device that I could keep charged, and they're fragile, things can happen to an electronic device, so you don't rely on it as your only source, but it's a good source to have that stores a lot of potential information. And again, something I'd ingest, I want those details.
Especially when you're dealing something like alcohol, where you can potentially make a poison, or make a...
You can distill it to be way too pure. You can do... there's all... Or you can accidentally not distill off the stuff you need to get rid of. Not to be a debate online about alcohol making, because that's not what the show's about. But again, I'd like to have the instructions somewhere.
And I was just thinking, we were sitting here talking, that notes you've taken on things, whether you had the entire thing or not. I like to say that Evernote, the link to that is an app I use on like all my electronics. It's on my desktop computers, my laptop. So, you want to keep notes. I was thinking like my notes from school, but then I have Evernote, which is an app that I use that's on my desktop, it's on my laptop, it's on my iPad, it's on my iPhone. All that stuff gets synced. It's kind of kept in the cloud, but some of it is actually kept on your device. And that has notes from school. It has, like, if I have a survival article, I'll just toss the whole thing in there. Yeah. And that collection of information helps you when you're prepping. I mean, another thing I do is I keep shopping lists on it, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, oh, I need to get, more of this, and I'll put a shopping list on there, and then I'll just have it with me when I need. Or I'm sitting at my work computer, I'm like, oh, crap, I need 6 months supply of toilet paper. And I'll type a note into Evernote, 6 months supply of toilet paper. And then I get to Sam's, and I open my iPhone, I pull up the Evernote app, and it's like shopping list. Oh, 6 months supply of toilet paper. I forgot about that. Mm-hmm. And, yeah. That's kind of a useful... and that is actually useful because it gives you your information where you want it.
And that was going back to the Kindle and the iPad Kindle app and all that stuff. That was one of the reasons I've started really using those for my reading, is because with books, I don't like to write in the book. I mean, I'll highlight in the book, but I don't like to write in the book, and I can't write detailed notes in the book. But with one of those apps, I can write detailed notes off in their own little notes. And while those do get synced into a cloud and then synced back to my other devices, they're still there and available on the device. So I can still open it up. And it's like I use the Mobile Me subscription, which will be free soon, hopefully. And but I'll keep notes on that. But once those notes are synced to my different devices, then I have those notes and things available to me all the time.
Not to geek out on the show or anything, but Mobile Me is actually going away, and iCloud is free. Yes. So as of September, everybody will be able to sign up for all that stuff and have all of that synced across their Apple devices. There's other available apps for PCs too. And since none of us in here are really PC guys, feel free to post in the comments section. If we mention something that's iPad or iPhone, an app for those devices, iOS devices, or for Mac, please feel free to put the PC alternative or the Android alternative into the comment section.
Yeah, one thing, talking about the Kindle, and the reason I said I sent it to my dad is he was asking about it. And my wife has Kindle and I have a Kindle, and we both have iPads now. Mm-hmm. And so I don't really use my Kindle that much. So he wanted it. So I said, hey, I'll just send it to you because I have the Kindle app. Well, one of the problems with the Kindle app versus the Kindle itself is on the Kindle itself, the notes that you take just end up as like actually a text file on the Kindle. And if you plug the Kindle in and mount that thing on your desktop, you can just drag that note file out and then put it anywhere you want. Huh. Now, they do sync those notes now, and you can go to Amazon and look at your notes and your highlights, but they only do it for books you bought from them.
Okay.
So I had books that I got from the Baen Free Library, which is a science fiction publisher, and those books, if I highlight anything in them, they don't end up getting synced up into Amazon. And on the iPad, you can't get at that note file like you could on the Kindle. So that's kind of an issue with the but it does sync them around things,
Yeah, it's good stuff. And if you use it as a tool, now here's the other thing to think about. You've got these devices, they're tools, just like your flashlight. You need to think about how you keep them working. Yeah. So, I mean, nobody ever questions that you need to have batteries for your flashlight or matches to start a fire or all these other things. Yet everybody seems to question, you're going to need power for your electronics device. And I'm not mocking anyone who said that. I'm just saying you have to think a step ahead. So we've talked a lot about, say, the Juice Orange. I can keep my iPad charged indefinitely using a solar Juice Orange.
And the full review of the Juice Orange on the site, which we'll link to in the show notes, that was part of my experiment with that, was keeping both my iPhone and my iPad charged for the entire length of, what was it, a 7-day trip to Mexico?
Yep.
I never once plugged either of those devices into an electrical outlet. It was, I never plugged it into grid power. The entire time I used the Juice Orange to power it up. And there are a couple other solar chargers out there. It's just we talk about it because that's the one we've recently
used a couple other ones.
We used the Solio, and I really did not like the Solio. Right. Will work, but it's, to me, not to get into a whole review of the Solio, but it was, the technology just really wasn't there yet.
The price you paid for it didn't, in my mind, take it to the level of the Juice. And then I bought a generic one off of Amazon just to try out about a year and a half ago. And it was the same as the Solio. Yeah, the Solio. It would charge an iPhone. It took a ridiculous amount of time. and then it wasn't going to do anything else. And I think it brought an iPhone to 70%.
Mm-hmm.
With the Juice, yeah, it's bigger, but like I said in last week's show, I used it to I've been using it to charge my iPad and iPhone while I'm on the road just traveling instead of using my car charger. Sorry, Ron just had a funny look on his face as he was investigating the room for a sound that just came from the kitchen.
No, I was thinking about the Juice. Is it? So it's orange and it has a big. It's like about this big.
The Juice Orange is actually white, and it's
Oh.
about the size of your Kindle but thicker.
Oh, okay.
It's about the size of the Kindle, but about an inch thick.
Yeah, it's about an inch thick, but it's the same size as a Kindle.
Because some of the ambulances I've been on have something that's about like, I don't know, how big would you guys say that is to our listeners?
That looks like it's about 12 by
a foot.
Yeah.
Kinda.
Yeah.
And it's a solar panel, and they use it to charge the radios.
Yeah.
It sits on the dashboard.
There's a few types out there, and I think that one's the one you're talking about. I don't know if it has a battery built into it.
I don't know. It didn't look. I mean, that was all I could see, and then the wire ran down. I didn't actually know where it goes. I asked them what they used
If
it
anybody
for.
listening knows what that is, go ahead and please put it in the comment section of the show notes so we can figure it out.
But the point of what I'm saying is, you think of this again in terms of it being a tool, and you need a way to keep that tool working, whether it be the tools to sharpen your knife, the batteries to keep your flashlight working, or the charger to keep your iPad going, or your Kindle, or whatever it might be. It's useful to have that kind of power. Plus, you're going to want to keep your phone powered anyway, because most likely you're not in an end of the world situation. The cell towers will eventually come back up. The world will start working again as normal. It takes time, even after a hurricane or a major disaster. But things start getting back to normal, and you're going to want internet. You're going to want communication to your family to call them. And these kind of charging devices, if you're without power for 2 weeks, your phone could be, even if you turn it off, could potentially be dead after 2 weeks.
Now, come on, Jonathan. I know you built a Faraday cage to protect your iPad from the EMP attack.
My whole house is a Faraday cage, actually.
That's impressive. That was a lot of copper wire.
It was a ton of copper wire. Luckily, I did it before the copper spiked.
Oh.
So
So
the whole
you
house.
also have a survive. You could just like sell off that wire.
Yeah.
And survive.
Did you wear a tinfoil hat while you built the Faraday cage?
I'm the same one I'm wearing right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. It's I didn't know how many you had. I mean, we all have so many tinfoil hats.
I have a dress hat.
I almost said Teflon hats.
I have a dress tinfoil hat and a casual tinfoil hat.
That's it.
Okay.
And then,
Well,
of course, I
making
have the tinfoil sleeping cap.
Yeah.
That's different.
But you gotta have extra at night because that's when the voices come.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
You know the thing about EMP, and that's the thing that I think pops in everybody's mind when they start thinking electronics and start thinking computer equipment. And in a way, from a survivalist point of view, if you think EMP and you could handle EMP, you could handle anything. For the most part, that's kind of the thought process there, because that's such a crazy as everything stops working. Going back to the Stone Age problem. And yeah, that's true, but it is a good metaphor to use if you want to be prepared for anything. But we're not all going to be able to go that far.
Right.
That's very difficult.
Really kind of, so backup people, you just, because you get that in your mind and then you bring it up every time when you're thinking survival situations. And that's probably not the survival situation to bring up every time. We talk a lot about hurricanes.
Right.
Because to us, that's the situation that we have all gone through, that we will probably all go through again. Well, not me, but
well, if you live in California, you're probably talking about earthquakes.
Yeah, you're talking about earthquakes.
If you live in the Northeast, it's blizzards. The last big thing that hit you was a blizzard.
Although they were expecting hurricanes to go up the northeastern coast this year.
This year, come fall, you might be seeing some hurricanes. If you live in, say, the Midwest, tornadoes. If you live down the Mississippi somewhere, flooding. So everybody's got something.
Yeah.
There's something that's going to hit.
And those are the
everywhere.
things that need to pop into your head first, not EMP.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, if you want to plan for EMP, that's fine. I'm all for it, but plan for the disaster that's more likely to happen first.
And the more research I think that we've done on EMPs, the more we found it is just so unlikely because of the difficulty it would require for someone that wants to shut down life as we know it. It really is just insanely difficult to create an EMP and the right kind of EMP to throw us back into the Stone Age. Not that it
seems like a lot of work.
I mean, these people have made their life's mission out of that. But even with your life's mission as that, it's not a simple technical feat.
Well, but these people, however irrational and insane terrorists tend to be, To the rest of the world, they are irrational and insane. I'm sure to themselves, they are very rational thinking people. But you still, no matter who you are, you're going to go for the biggest impact for the smallest buck that you can get. And that is not the biggest impact to the smallest buck. That is a huge buck to a relatively small impact.
Well, my understanding, and maybe I don't understand EMP, but my understanding was if you can put a rocket, 30 miles up over central U.S., you're going to knock out like most of the U.S.?
No, so
with a nuke in it?
That's what we found. When we did the research, even the scientists there was apparently an EMP commission put together by Congress. And what they found is you might be able to take out a small region of the U.S., meaning like a 2 to 3 state area. But that's the most you're going to hit in any one.
That's a pretty big bang, though.
Oh, it's a huge bang, but that's not permanent. And we, in the EMP show, we talked a little bit about the permanence of that and how if that happened, you'd very quickly have a response from the rest of the country and the rest of the world trying to get us back online because it's not in the economic best interests of any of our friends, enemies, or frenemies.
So China,
to have us out of commission. I mean, even our biggest frenemy, China, maybe they want us to suffer a little bit just for fun, but they don't want us to stop buying their stuff.
Yeah.
So they'd be the first in line to sell us all the Transformers we needed to be back up and running.
Please start buying shoes again.
Right.
You guys need to get back online and buying more of our stuff.
Exactly.
And that would, and then that's one of the reasons they would never get involved or allow something like that to happen, at least from their end, is maybe we'll see it in the future where they become less dependent on us. But as it stands right now and in the very foreseeable future, if our economy collapses or if our country collapses, they are screwed. And it doesn't matter if they unpeg I don't remember what they call their currency, even if they unpeg from us and even if they get out financially not so entangled with us, they're still economically tangled up with us in the sense that we buy all the stuff they make.
Well, they that's all done to some extent intentionally, but
yeah,
the big world wars of the future are going to either be with tiny little countries. Right now we're having, whether you believe it or not, a world war with Libya. That should scare you a little, but there is a world war with Libya. That scares the living crap out of me. Just not because of what it is, but because of the rest of it. But
that's another show.
Going past that for a sec, exactly.
The whole European Union and the U.S. are fighting a war, and they haven't won it yet with that little country.
Exactly. Or even Afghanistan. Or Iraq. So
back on track.
Okay, back on track. The giant size, quote unquote, wars of the future are all economic. China has been at war with the United States for a long time. So is India, and people don't think of them as wars because they're not. We're not talking about loss of life.
Well, they're not traditional wars.
They're wars for economic dominance, and the goal is to be the economic leaders of the world. So going back to the point of the whole discussion, I don't see any of our friends or frenemies assisting with something like that, and I think it would take a lot of work to actually do a nationwide kind of EMP based on what the research we've done.
Based on the research we've done, it would take several. I think when I was looking, it was the most efficient way. It was about 4 warheads that were all very sizable warheads. And the problem is you have to get those warheads close enough off our coasts. You have to get them positioned rather perfectly. They have to be the right kind of warhead because each warhead puts off a different, based on the research we did, puts off a different frequency of EMP, which not every EMP affects all electronics exactly the same way.
It gets, and if you actually read the congressional report, it's 6, and they all have to make it into our airspace, which in and of itself is highly unlikely because we still do have an air force and missile defense, and
you have to get that much radiological material to build it. And even when I was looking over, what nuclear weapons were missing from Russia, even that was not significant enough.
Yeah, it was a big deal to do. So the point being, yes, maybe that's a scenario. If you'd like to, you're welcome to worry about it.
But then build a Faraday cage.
Then build yourself a Faraday cage and sit right in the middle of it, reading books on your iPad. What was
Alien Invasion.
Alien Invasion.
Well, right now, the only survival-related television show is Falling Skies.
Yes.
Alien Invasion.
Yes. That's
with
true.
With an EMP first, which I watched that episode, I'm like, Dude, if you had like a nationwide EMP, you got enough problems. These people are all going to be dead in a week anyway. So I don't know what you're talking about.
90%, right?
Yeah, and then we have to worry about the aliens coming who are like anyway. I didn't stick with Falling Skies very long.
It was probing that really concerned me the most. Alien probing.
Shh. That only happened once.
That was our trip to Roswell.
And we don't talk about that.
Mostly because I don't think Ken will speak to us ever again if we talk about that. All right. So, but there's moving past EMPs and the more extreme things, there's keeping these things alive. It's just like everything else. You have to figure out how to keep fire alive. You have to keep, there's the basic rule of keeping yourself alive. You have to keep enough water, everything else. All of this takes work. And the other part that I think a lot of people fall into the habit of thinking is the dependency on electronics. And if you're worried about that, electronics are a tool, and if you look at them as a tool, you could do whatever the task is without it. In most instances, when it comes to most tools, you could do the task by hand. The tool just makes it easier and more efficient. It's the same way with being able to keep whatever 400 books as Jonathan keeps on his iPad. But, the basic knowledge is still there. The books just allow for more detail and more efficient recall of the detail. So I think that's an important thing. I think a lot of people get caught up in the idea that, but I understand where they're coming from, because we look at society, and as survivalists, we look at a lot of people that are so dependent and so immersed in their technology. I think we would have a big psychological shock if it was all gone tomorrow.
Don't take it away.
Don't take it away from me. Don't take it away from my cold, dead hand. But there's the idea that, that's why we learn, even as urban survivalists, I think it's good to learn bushcraft, learning to make a fire by hand with nothing more than, a shoestring and a stick and a knife, or, what is it? Send me out naked into the woods and you're a real man if you can come back in 3 days with a knife, clothed and fed. But it's that same thing. That's why we learn these skills, and that's one of the reasons we push the importance of skills so much on this show. Is the more skills you learn, the less you need as you try to survive. It gives you more options, and it also lessens your dependency on any one thing. So I think that's a big important thing to take away from the discussion. Is they're important, they're very useful tools, but if you are dependent on them, yeah, they're bad. But if you are prepared and you're constantly learning new skills, then you can step back and not be dependent on it. And I think we lose out so much if we take electronics out of the equation and try to, then we'd have to take so much.
Yeah.
All of our cars are electronics these days, and none of us walk to work,
And one of the things, too, is we talk about survival, but we're also talking about kind of having a lifestyle.
Yeah.
And a no knowledge of electronics is going to give you a crappy lifestyle in 21st century America.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And I think about, I'll try and find it and send it to you to post. There was this quote by Robert Heinlein, who's a science fiction author. He's dead now, one of the early days. And he said, every man should be able to, and he has this long list that includes all these different things. And it's from a science fiction point of view, but it goes from butchering a hog to navigating a spaceship. And there's just this whole a real well-rounded, going forward in life person should be able to handle different situations. And some of those situations you need low-tech skills. And a lot of us urban people don't have those low-tech skills. But other situations need high-tech skills.
Right.
And if you don't have those high-tech skills, you're not going to survive in that situation as well.
Well, and I kind of want to bring up some. So we, in the last few weeks, have talked a lot about survival and end of the world as you know it, incidents and EMPs. But something to consider is we've started this show off now 26 episodes ago.
26 episodes.
We started the show off with the whole idea of surviving isn't just surviving. This is about urban living and survival. And in order to make your life easier on a day-to-day basis, you're using these electronic tools. These are tools you're going to be using every day. You're going to want to store the important information to you in these tools. Maybe you've decided Dropbox isn't secure enough for whatever reason and you're going to a different tool. Doesn't matter. You want to store the deed to your house, or a copy of the deed to your house. You want to store a copy of your travel information like your passport, your birth certificate, your social security card. You want to store all of that and you want to make them accessible when you need them. which means if you want to store all these documents, having them in a waterproof bag is great. But if you just got caught in a mass flood in the area you live in, getting to that waterproof bag sitting in the safe in your house might be a little difficult when it's 3 or 4 feet underneath the surface of the water and your house is submerged. So all of that becomes difficult. On the other hand, if you evacuated and you forgot to get something, but you brought your iPad or you brought your iPhone or you brought your USB thumb drive
or even a laptop, you've got access to that critical, vital information, your insurance information, your identification information, things you might need to eventually get back to your house and be able to get your stuff. So all of that becomes vitally important. This isn't just about surviving a particular event. It's about everyday living. I mean, if you've got access, let's say you lose your wallet and your house is robbed, your passport's gone, all this stuff's gone. Well, you've got this electronic device with you. Maybe it's an iPhone, maybe it's an Android phone. You've got copies of a lot of the information you'll need. I'm not saying that'll get you your driver's license, but it has all the data you need in it to make that a lot easier a process. Yeah, I was working with one of Neil Strauss's, the author of Emergency. I was working with one of his assistants, and I was helping her prepare for something she's about to do, and I had her prepare both a physical version of the personal information packet that we have an article about on the website, but I also had her make a digital one.
Yeah.
And I was like, the nice thing about the digital one is it's recreatable.
Right.
And then it's not just recreatable by you. If you then, because when she and I were talking about it, we were talking about it through using Dropbox, which I really love, and we'll put a link in the show notes today. But she and I were working with encrypting all of the information and then throwing it out, and that's one of the ways I keep mine. But it allowed her access, but then she could share access with a family member that was not going anywhere.
Right.
So then that family member would be able to reproduce and print out any of the important documents that she might need and that might get lost on her trip.
Oh, yeah, and the State Department even now recommend, they've always recommended having a copy of your passport when you travel. They also now recommend keeping a digital copy, even if that just means emailing it to yourself. So that when you're traveling, because again, survival isn't just about surviving an event, it's about day-to-day living.
Yeah.
Every day you are alive, you are surviving. The critical thing to remember, by the way. It's an important aspect of life, survival. But again, going back to the whole idea of what you were saying, which is giving someone else access to information. If you're an avid hiker, one of the things to do to make your family much more comfortable about what you're doing is to go get a Spot.
Mm-hmm.
Spot is a great device. If you get in trouble, you can press a button and you send out an emergency signal. It uses the GPS satellite system and it actually uses a GPS relay system to be able to find you. You don't need any cellular signal or anything like that. Emergency crews can find you. It can also, when tied with a 4-fee service I think they offer on a monthly basis, be used to actually transmit what your nightly location is.
Yeah.
So people can actually track where you are. And if you're traveling through Europe, this is going to sound silly, but you can get on Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is, and you can say, hey, I'm here. Just let people know you're okay. Because believe it or not, a big portion of survival is everybody feeling comfortable about what's going on. Keep everybody happy and not concerned, and all of a sudden you have a much happier existence.
BMH Jeep who's one of the only other admin on the site and has been a long-time listener, that was one of the things that he and I were going back and forth when he was dealing with the tornadoes in his area, was that, and if I'm misquoting this, Jeep, just go ahead and throw it in the comments, but he was getting most of his information, and I remember him saying the most real-time accurate information he was getting and useful information was actually coming off Twitter.
Oh, I believe it. So Twitter announced, I think it was Friday, that they're now there's 350 billion tweets a day. If there is something you want to know about going on somewhere in the world, someone has tweeted it. Okay, so, and actually this is to that same point, but not to the same level of extreme. Austin, Texas was recently having an issue with a building in its downtown area dropping glass. And I don't mean little pieces of glass. I mean 250-pound sheets of glass were falling on the streets of Austin off of a building. And not just one or two. This was all the sheets of glass off of all the glass balconies hanging off that building. I'm not going to get into too much detail about it, but the idea is I found all the news I needed about what the streets that were closing, street closures, police warnings, when streets were reopened, all on Twitter. People in that area were tweeting the information, and I was able to see it in real time. I had a meeting downtown. I knew which streets to avoid. I knew where not to go to get hit by a piece of glass or not get hit by a piece of glass. And trust me, not getting hit by a 250-pound piece of glass is a good way to continue surviving.
Yes. Yes.
I found the Heimlich quote. See? Electronics in action.
There you go.
While you're talking, I looked it up.
What did you find?
This is that quote I was saying that has the things, and I got it wrong. I don't think he has connoship. Anyway, a human being should be able to change a diaper, plan an invasion, butcher a hog, con a ship, design a building, write a sonnet, balance accounts, build a wall, set a bone, comfort the dying, take orders, give orders, cooperate, act alone, solve equations, analyze a new problem, pitch manure, program a computer, cook a tasty meal, fight efficiently, die gallantly. Specialization is for insects.
Yeah. There's also a term that, the most valuable people are Swiss Army knives. I mean,
I need to learn how to plan an invasion. That one I don't know how to do, I don't think.
Really?
No,
we'll talk.
We'll talk.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's your part of the...
Yeah, we will talk.
Tell you what, you teach me how to pitch manure. Because I have that's a skill I don't know.
Pitching manure is not, it's a little more complicated and it's a little more simple than it sounds.
I did notice when we went to the rabbits today, that's one of the things I got.
Yes, that you got roped into. Come on, Rob, we're going to go see the rabbits.
Was that you did basically make a manure cleaning device, catching device for your cat, for your rabbits.
Did you notice
so
all the rabbits had iPhones?
Yeah.
And
I wondered what
headsets.
that rabbit was doing. I mean, he didn't even look up when we walked in. He just
he was twittering.
Technology rabbits.
Yeah. No, we've I built in a bunny poop chute, and I've been playing with different designs for the most efficient poop catchment and storage system. It sounds a lot more technical than it is. It was just some corrugated plastic roofing that I chained up and put at an angle, and it all dumps down into a bucket, which we then take, and once that fills, we fill it into another bucket that we also put the chicken. That's more about the BC excrement handling.
That's one thing that people don't think about dealing with excrement, and it's actually something you're going to have to do if you raise animals or anything like that.
Or in a disaster when our sewage goes out.
And actually, when I was looking for the Heimlich quote, he had another one. He said, progress is not done by early risers. It's done by lazy men who want an easier way.
Yes.
And, that's it. You probably got tired of making all that crap,
and that's really where
sweeping all that crap up. So you're like, look, I can just make a thing where they all fall in a bucket, and then I can just empty the bucket.
Yeah,
and that that's an efficiency thing, but
there's an old marketing quote that says, and I'm going to misquote it, but it's something to the order of: "Innovation is not hard work. Innovation is finding the easiest way to do a simple task." And that's pretty much the same idea, but. That's the reason I like electronics so much. They are an easy way to do a simple task. And at the end of the day, so I'm going to go back to simple, normal disasters. In a normal disaster situation, whether it be tornadoes, hurricanes, flooding, most of the time, you can't make a phone call. But what you can do is send a text message. We have found that to be true, or I've found that to be true in any of the disasters I've been in, and I've actually oddly been in more than one. It's almost impossible to make a phone call when that happens. It's not going to happen for you. I don't care whether you have a landline, a cell phone, unless you have a direct wired connection to whoever you're making that call to, it isn't going to happen. So, on the other hand, if you've got a cell phone, I don't care whether it's a smartphone, a dumb phone, or something in between, you can do a text message. Might not get there quickly, but it'll get there. And you'll potentially hopefully get a response back in some reasonable amount of time. But even if it takes a day to say, hey, I'm okay, that's huge relief to the person receiving that message. And then for them to reply back, you may now have, survival is mostly a mental game. And if your spouse can get back to you with, yes, I'm okay too, that may put you in the mental situation be much more prepared to survive through something that is going to be, not pleasant than if you didn't have that communication back and forth.
And as a group, that's when the hurricanes have hit. When the hurricanes have hit the Gulf and stuff, as a group, that's how we've communicated with everybody's okay, anybody need anything, and it's all been through text message back and forth. Because, there were some text messages that would take 3 hours to get through, but it was a message across town that I couldn't. I wasn't going to strap a note to a carrier pigeon and send it, hurtle it in your general direction.
Yeah, we only live about 6 miles apart, but it's 6 miles separated by highways, all kinds of very difficult things to bypass, like a bayou.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, with gas being as depleted as it was and everything else, neither one of us was going to drive over to the other one unless it was an emergency.
Yeah.
And we knew that, we could communicate via text messaging. And first thing I did, the next morning, and I got a message from Aaron around the same time he probably got a message from me, being like, hey, everything's all right here, no power, but things are good. And my response back was essentially, yeah, everything good here too. I'm going to end up in Austin, so don't worry about us.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a pretty good back and forth using technology.
Yeah.
Well, part of the technology was definitely not usable, the phone call aspect. And the internet was ridiculously slow, but it did work.
Mm-hmm.
The connections on the phones over 3G actually did work, but they were very slow.
And even, that was kind of a weird thing. Sometimes I've noticed that even though if you have like cable or dish or whatever like that, a lot of times the TV part will go out, but the internet part will maintain as long as power is still going to whatever the main switching station is and everything else. That your web will still work. But going back to the phones, and since you have a background and you had a background in mobile communications, what you and I were talking not too long ago, and there's some changes that have happened where as far as it used to be that, and I think we've even mentioned it in the show, and so I'm taking this time to correct something stupid I may have said, or not stupid, ignorant or misinformed that I may have said, which was that it used to be that the long distance and local calling were two separate systems. So if the phone system went out, you could then place a long distance phone call and have somebody, like, let's say we're both here in Houston and we have a friend in Phoenix.
Right.
If we couldn't call each other, maybe we could each call the person in Phoenix, and that person could act as basically a relay.
So in the past, that was true because you had wired landline phones. And on a wired landline phone through a traditional carrier, so not like a Vonage or something like that, but if you have a standard, if you've had a phone in your house for the last 20 years and it's that same phone, then you can possibly still do that depending on how your carrier has routed their network. But if you're on a cell phone, the issue is that you have to go local first because you've got to get to the tower. And then from that tower, you're going to local communication systems that then go out to a hub that then takes you to the long-distance call. So the system is set up a little bit different than it used to be. And most of the time, what goes out first is voice, not because the voice actually goes out, but because so many people are trying to hit those voice trunks, which are separate from the data trunks.
And they require the voice.
And well, here, there's only one other thing to add.
Okay.
SMSs, or text messaging as most people know it, that goes over the voice trunk. But what's cool about it is it uses such a small bandwidth on that it can kind of flow over it. And yeah, that's why it slows down, because the trunk is just so heavily packed, but it still makes it. The voice calls, there's not enough bandwidth or not enough capacity in that thing to get you from point A to point B, so it just doesn't even let you through. You get either that message that says, this connection can't be completed, or these lines are currently busy, or whatever it might be, but depending on which way you're calling. With cell phones, sometimes it just won't even connect to the network to make that call. So what will work is the text messaging, and then data is separate trunks. So sometimes data will work, it'll just work more slowly, because just imagine everybody is trying to hit the data at once. But to your point, yes, a regular landline phone could potentially still work that way, depending on how AT&T, or depending on where you are in the country, Verizon has wired their network. So that could still work. But most of us have cell phones, and that's probably your first try. Send a text message. Let people know you're okay via text.
I don't even have, I can't tell you how long it's been since I've actually had a home phone.
I don't have a home phone either. I haven't for a long time. Even my fax is digital. There's no actual machine that it even goes to.
And all the phones at my office are now at least 5 years, or they're now VoIP. They all come in over a T1, and it's all digital, and they're all reliant on the.
And a lot of people are now using, phones through Time Warner, Roadrunner, or Comcast, or
one
whatever.
thing to bring up from an EMS point of view, to figure a way to get it in, is using your cell phone to call 911. It's better, that your cell phones now that have GPSs can actually send where they're at, but you need to tell people where you're at, because even they call that E911. Even if you could do that, not every place has E911. They don't have the equipment for it. Not every dispatch does. It's not super specific about where you're at.
Yeah.
I've talked to dispatchers and they're like, we get some information, but really should tell us where. And they've been putting out like messages lately, trying to make sure people understand that if you call on a cell phone, you need to tell them where you're at.
Well, in certain parts of the country, I've noticed that if you call 911, you don't actually go to 911 first. You go to your carrier's emergency number. If there's no E911 in that area, you go to your carrier's emergency number. They ask you where you are because they don't even know where in the country you potentially are. So what they're doing is they're then routing that call based on the towers and what you're saying to the proper police authority to then get you in the right place. But and we actually had to do that. My wife and I were driving back from Colorado, and we saw something. There was an accident on the side of the road, and it was kind of in a remote area, and the people looked like they were about to start having a little bit of a brawl. So my wife said, should we call the police? I said, if you really want to, go for it. But we weren't going to stop because it did look like it wasn't going to turn into a pleasant situation. So we pulled a little bit ahead, and she called the police. But that's what happened, where they actually routed us through, at the time we were with AT&T, routed through an AT&T operator who confirmed where we were, asked for a mile marker, the whole bit, and then they were able to route us to the proper police authority in Colorado.
Yeah, and I mean, when you call 911 nowadays, you get sent to a central dispatch, and what central dispatch will ask you what's the nature of your emergency, is what we see on television. I don't know if that's actually what they say. But the reason is because if you need a cop, you go to one dispatch. If you need an ambulance, you go to another. If you need a fire truck, you go to a third. Or it's actually more the EMS and fire normally together, but police are separate. So they want to know. So they're just going to say, what's the nature of your emergency? And if you say, I can't breathe, okay, bam, you're going to medical. And they don't even they don't know anything about it. They're just transferring you to the right thing. So you're going to go through some steps there.
It's a switchboard.
Yeah, and if you don't know if you don't know where you are, you're going to have issues if you're on a cell phone.
Yeah, so that is something to consider, but just, and that's going to be true also of voice over IP phones.
Yeah.
And you have to be careful with that because not all of them support E911. Some do, some don't.
Just because you have, what happens, I understand with Vonage, and I don't have it, is you tell them where the phone is.
You do. You actually go on. I had Vonage for a period of time before I completely got rid of the landline concept. And what you do is you go in and you have to activate E911. And when you do that, you go through a process that verifies that address is in some database that works with E911. Because if it doesn't, they tell you that area doesn't support it. So they go through, it's a whole long process. And I think it takes about 24 hours to actually activate it through.
Right, but the thing is that you could have picked up your Vonage receiver, and gone to Australia and plugged it in, and boom.
Exactly.
You're talking on the phone. Because I know of a company that had an Australian employee, and they essentially did that. They bought one of these wireless routers for phone, set it up in the U.S., and then mailed it to the guy in Australia. So now calling him is a local call.
Yeah, and I could see that as being a real issue for it.
But of course, that was not E911 registered to Australia.
Yeah, right.
That's a very long ambulance ride.
Yes, it is. But, these are things you need to think of when you're thinking about the technology you're using.
That reminds me, when you go to a foreign country, it's not 911.
Yeah, it changes depending on where you are.
In Britain, it's 999.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all things that you need to know before you go on a trip is what is the emergency number in that. Because I know somebody, I can't remember who, somebody had an article about that recently, and it wasn't. It was every country had something different.
I think some of them are like 000, and some of them are like 111, and
so
they're 919.
Let's not get too much into it because I think we should do a whole travel show.
Yeah, I think that would be a good show.
Sure
at the very least, we should find a link. I bet there's a link to all the emergency codes. Numbers.
Yeah, I think there is. We'll try to find it and put it in there. But I think one of the other things that we should talk about is we touched on it a little bit, but all the apps out there. There are apps, and we'll just go over this briefly. And one of the things I'd really like for people to do is if you have a survival app or any of the apps that are in any way related to what we're talking about today, please put them in the comment section and share them with other people that may be interested and may like to know what they were, and I'll put even mine. Because like some of the ones I keep a hurricane tracker, and I think you keep the same hurricane tracker in your phone. And that's one of the things during hurricane season. Every morning I get up, and while I'm drinking coffee, that's one of the first things I check is okay, is there anything in the Gulf that I need to be aware of? I have a hazardous materials app that I can go through, and I can look up the different hazardous material placards that go on the back of 18-wheelers.
The orange book?
I think so. I'd have to look.
I think there's a free one and a 4-fee one. Do the 4-fee one.
Yeah, the 4-fee one, it gets updated, and it's there's a lot more detail in it. And that's actually the last time I got stuck behind a train. I sat there just out of boredom and fun, and I was looking up all the different hazardous materials.
I hope that train doesn't crash.
Yeah, I was like, oh god, no! At least let that car get further down the road if this thing's going to crash. But there's so much, and I mean, there's there's emergency radio scanners that are out there and available that you can listen to, and so you can pick up all kinds of things from all over the world.
And just on a simple basis, my two favorite survival apps, and I'm air quoting here so you can't see it, but Dropbox is number one.
Mm-hmm.
And then Bento, which for those of you that don't know, Bento is a database that can go on your computer and your phone, and you can put all kinds of things in Bento. It's a database that you can create all kinds of weird, strange databases.
Is Bento PC compliant? I can't remember.
Bento is not PC compliant, so you can have it for your iOS device. And what was that?
Evernote.
That's
the same thing. It's the same kind of thing, and it is cross-platform, and it also works on your iPhone. Does Bento have an iPhone client?
Bento does have an iPhone client, yeah.
But Bento is basically a consumer-level database that keeps photos and notes and all kinds of information about it.
And I love those. Are not oddly, but they're not traditional survival applications. But my entire life is in an encrypted file inside of Dropbox. And for encryption, by the way, I think we've mentioned this before. There's a great application called TrueCrypt,
and it's free.
It's free. It's cross-platform, and it will secure your documents in a way that can either be equal to or far, far stronger than any military even approved encryption. So you can use AES 256, which is standard DoD NSA encryption, or you can go all the way up to, you want to get real crazy, I think you can do 1024 AES or AES plus Blowfish or AES plus Blowfish plus DSA. So for any of you that know what that is, all that's really, really strong. If you don't know what it is, it's really, really strong encryption. If you do want to know what it is, you probably are using TrueCrypt already. But it's a good way to, if you are going to put things on something like Dropbox that are secure documents like your social security card, it would still be, you probably still want to encrypt that document. Even though Dropbox says they have a level of security, there were recently some issues with it. So think of it this way. It's out there on the internet, even if it's just transmitting between your computers. Put some encryption on it, keep it safe, and make sure you can open it from just about anywhere.
And to kind of round out the end of the show today, some things I'd like to put into perspective for listeners and people that may really kind of push back against the idea of accepting technology and even accepting technology in the realm of survival. At some point, the car that you get into every day and drive to work in was mind-blowing technology. And if you don't take a car, and you take a bicycle, at some point, that bicycle was mind-blowing new technology.
Right.
At some point, the light bulb in your home that you read by and look out on the world, and unless you're Amish, and if you're Amish, you're not listening to this show. I don't think the Amish can have iPads or iPhones or any of that stuff. But you can go as far back as, at some point, the wheel was a mind-blowing technology, and look where it took our world, and look how much easier that made survival for our ancestors however long ago.
Well, and not to sound like, I'm just stating the obvious here, but it's an urban survival show. And if you live in a city today, there's nothing about that city that wasn't built based on technology and and you probably use on a daily basis a cell phone, a telephone in your office that's based on voice over IP. You have a computer because you probably, and I'm guessing this, have a job. If you don't have a job, you're looking for a job, in which case you're using the internet as well. If you're not looking for a job and you don't have a job, well, congratulations, you are independently wealthy, in which case you're playing with your high-tech toys every day because you can afford them. So at the end of the day, you're using it on a daily basis. Try to continue to use the tools you have, use them to the best you can. And yeah, I'm not telling you that these tools will survive an impact off of a 5-story building and then continue to be functional through the end of the world as you know it event that might happen. But through most events that you're going to see in a year or 2 years, within the next 10 years, these things will keep working. And if you have the right tools to back them up, like the chargers, the generators, the batteries, then you'll be fine and you'll be able to use these tools for the 2-3 weeks you might be without power.
With that, we wrap up episode 26. Thank you for joining us today. If you liked the podcast, be sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. If you didn't, please use the feedback form on the site and tell us what we can do to improve. Be sure to connect with us through Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and the Urban Survival Forum through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Also, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. By connecting with us, you receive updates about the site and notifications of new articles and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to the site, intherabbithole.com, that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each and every episode where we invite you to comment on the show and interact with us. From Houston, Texas, till next time, stay safe and sound.